Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. I'm here with Graeme Barber. This is Manny. And today we're going to talk more about Book of Cylinder, the chapter in Candlekeep Mysteries that came out recently for Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast. And Graeme Barber, as we talked before, was the author of Book of Cylinders. But now that you've seen it, you've noticed there's some big changes from what you wrote previously to what's been printed.
Yes.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what were some of the what were things? What were some of the biggest changes that you saw in your adventure, without giving too much away?
Okay. The biggest changes that I saw to my adventure, um, sort of like there's a few stages to it. The first one was the beginning of the adventure. The beginning of the adventure was completely rewritten, and I can understand it to a degree. My adventure, as it went in, was a little on the esoteric side. Like there was some prior knowledge or interest that was required to sort of get the ball rolling. So I can understand why the beginning was rewrote. But at least in my opinion, it was rewritten to the extent that it actually doesn't need the book. Because like they added an NPC and the players could actually just talk to the NPC, get directions, and go. Um, so it sort of took that aspect of the mystery out. The other one is that my um, my chapter in the book was reduced by around 1,300 words. We originally had an 8,000 word cap. My final submission came in under 7,000 words, and what came out was like 5,600 or so. And what was removed out of it was a lot of the lore, backstory, and information that gave the situation gravity and that drove the motivations of the Yuan Ti and put the situation into motion. And the final thing that was altered was the descriptions of all the things around the Gripley village, and with the exception of the crab maze, I made it through like 100%. Apparently, people like the crab maze, but the descriptions of other things in it were changed. The references back to the Days of Thunder, to the Batrachi Empire, all that sort of stuff that I talked about previously, were removed and replaced with like sort of very generic, like anchoring imagery and anchoring terminology to make sure that you knew that the Gripply didn't have any sort of like technological sophistication or anything else like that. So like the word primitive was added a couple of times to describe the Gripply, where I had used terms like ramshackle and stuff like that to describe what was going on with them. And yeah, everything was just sort of made to seem like where I'd tried to put a more positive spin onto them and tried to present them as a more like active and interesting group. They sort of came out the other end as a very generic, non-human animal folk, beast folk sort of operation.
Let's talk a little bit about that, about the tone of your adventure and
Mhm.
language. It bothers me a little bit that of all the things they change, if it's one thing to change the adventure, maybe add different monster encounters or puzzles or things like that, but to change the description of a race of a group of creatures or people, to me that's always bugged me a little bit because it changes the tone or the perspective of how we view them. Um, why do you feel the same way? Do you feel that
I,
that
I I do feel the same way. I'd gone out of my way while writing it to avoid using terms like primitive, because they're psychologically anchoring when you hear that term, and especially if it's in reference to a people. It immediately conjures up imagery and concepts to associate with them. Like myself, like if I use the term primitive when I'm writing, it'll be something like, they built themselves a primitive cannon or something like that, in reference to, like a relatively technologically advanced group having to build something from scratch or out of junk or something like that, then I would use it. But I wouldn't use it to refer to, like, well, these people of blah, 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 or a primitive group, because the minute you do that, it just immediately creates imagery and conceptualization that I work very hard to avoid, and is stuff that I've written against in the past. And so, even though it was just twice, that's enough. Like, it's not a long adventure. And with the additional information stripped out, like the information about the Ripley, the cultural information and stuff like that, there's no really good buffer against it. So, yeah.
So let's try to, I guess, course correct this adventure the way it's meant to be played. So,
Okay.
what for anyone that wants to play this and now are hearing about how much this has been changed, what tools can you give them? Is there any changes or anything like that you could recommend without again ruining the mystery of the story that
Yeah,
you made?
there's it's really challenging because um as I've said online there, I sent the whole adventure in, it was accepted, so it's now property of Wizards of the Coast, so I can't divulge a ton of the information about it because it hasn't been released. So it's unreleased information. What I can safely say is that if you want to play it closer to the original story, then there's a lot of Batrachi ruins and remnants of their civilization that the Gripply were a part of in the Gripply village. There was and the driving conflict behind it was based in 5th edition's soft reboot of the Forgotten Realms. One of the things that they did was they had the Lord Ao, like the overgod for the place, declared that all the gods were back. So if they've been dead before, they're back now. And that there's no longer issues with overlapping domains and things like that. And so one of the things that I did was I looked back at how the Yuan Ti and the Soraka Empire had evolved, which is like back in the days of Thunder. And you can get information on that from the Grand History of the Realms and from the Serpent Kingdoms book. Both those were 3rd edition, 3.5. And specifically the World Serpent, which was like this mega god. I don't know how else to describe it. But it like sort of like shed lesser gods that became like Seth and these other ones. And one of the things that did make it through everything was the Scaled Mother, which is a cult among the Yuan Ti that follows a benign aspect of the World Serpent. And so everything was tied up in getting some stuff back from the old temple in the Gripply village to help them basically start helping other Yuan Ti who don't want to be under the thumb of Seth and the evil Yuan Ti and stuff like that, because that was something that came up. It was almost like a throwaway sentence in the Tomb of Annihilation books, where there's an encounter where you could encounter Yuan Ti purebloods who didn't want to fight you. They just wanted to just be left alone to live their lives and be regular people. And so I thought that was really cool. And so I was integrating that into it. And so the entire drive was evil Yuan Ti trying to stop these, at least not evil ones, from accomplishing their ends. And the Gripply are caught in the crossfire of all of this.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There was also a discussion that, well, there was also hopes that you had a material about the Gripply as a possible player race. Um, uh, and they didn't have it in this book, unfortunately. Is this is there anything? I don't know if you could share what you planned for that exactly. For anyone that's interested, maybe playing a Gripply.
I actually just came up with a set of basic like player race information block for the Gripply, in case players wanted to play as one after the adventure, or if they wanted to like mix it up and have a Gripply in the party for the adventure. That information, that was one of the parts that was cut early in the process, when I was interacting with wizards, going through the writing process. And I didn't make it through into the main book. It was pretty straightforward. I mean, the Gripply aren't even with just like the information given in there, like in the book. I mean, if you gave them a +2 to one stat and a +1 to the other stat, like ability score, and then ran with their list of abilities as their natural abilities, it'd be pretty playable.
Yeah, it's surprising because I mean they have turtles.
Yeah.
You would think frogmen would be frog people wouldn't be, especially the imagination. Is there anything else about the story that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to share, that you want people to play Book of Cylinders to understand and know?
Just that my main thing is that my intent was not to portray the Gripply as primitive, and was to reach back and dip into some of the older lore. As it's said online, the like on Twitter, I believe it was, the adventure still works. There's a partial skeleton of my original adventure still there. It will still fill a session. Like it's literally like a one shot. Like if you've got 3 hours, you should be able to do it. But the big thing is that, as a lot of people have pointed out now, it feels like things are missing, and there's parts of it where they think there was supposed to be more. And so that's where the cut content really sort of flashes out at you. So if people do want to play it, I mean, obviously play it, like it's your table, have fun. I'm not going to scream at people not to play it. But just realize that stuff in there was not my intent, and that it's a very light adventure now. Like it's not complex. It was never super complex, but it's less complex now, and it's got very little else going on with it. Like a lot of people, like I've seen it described as being flat, or flat, straightforward, and uninspired. And having read the full thing now myself, I'm like, yeah, that's how it came out. It is an average adventure with no stakes now.
Are you, one last question, are you planning to do like a DM skill, like special guide or supplement?
I had been, before I sat down and gave it a hard read. The problem that I have is that a lot of the ideas that would go into a DM's Guild thing is stuff that I already sent in. So it's stuff that Wizards already has, and it would be very difficult to sort of tiptoe around all that stuff that I'd put in already, to produce something now. So unfortunately that plan has been scuttled, and can't go forwards, just because anything that I put out would have to be completely different than what had originally gone into the adventure. So it would be a pretty serious reimagining, and with other projects that I have coming up now and stuff like that, I don't have the time to sit down and hammer it all out again.
Well, for anyone that wants to see what your other work, the other works out there, where can they go online to check it out?
The main place to go check it out is my itch site. So it's GBDW Games on itch.io or ditch.io. Not sure how to pronounce that now. Anyways,
good question. I never thought of that.
So I have a page there. So there's an alternate set of experience points, experience point and leveling system I made for 5th edition. That's been fairly popular, especially after I felt so bad because the formatting was so horrible on it for so long, and I went in and actually fixed it all. because it doesn't look great now, but it was so much worse. And I felt bad for the people who had purchased it and wanted to make that right for them so they could have something that was legible. So that's there. I've got a science fiction role-playing game there called Wave Chasers, an inexplicably popular one called Fight City, the role-playing game, which is a bit of a love letter to the old side-scrolling beat-em-up video games from back in the day. So, and yeah, and of course Station Hunt, which is a game you can play at home by yourself or with your family if you want to drag them into it. So there's there, and of course my my blog pscgamer.com, and yeah, that's where you can find my stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you, sir, for taking the time to talk about your adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And to our viewers out there, I hope this has been educational, and stay tuned for more stuff. Have a great day, everyone.